Welcome back to Adventures Beyond the Horizon. I'm Anthony.
And I'm John. Today's episode is all about suspension lifts and getting your rig ready for the trail.
Yep, we're diving deep into what it takes to properly lift your vehicle and handle all those suspension questions you've been wondering about.
And to help us do just that, we've got a special guest joining us today. It's Anthony's good buddy and suspension guru, Chris.
Absolutely. So buckle up, get ready to learn, and let's welcome Chris to the show.
Chris, great to have you with us. To kick things off, why don't you tell our listeners a bit about yourself and the experience with suspensions?
Hey guys, thanks for having me. I'm Chris Hill, your local Colorado suspension guru artist guy. Basically, who I am, I'm a Colorado native. I grew up around trucks, four-wheeling, that kind of stuff. I've been installing lift kits for probably 15 years. I'm retired from that part now. I'm basically a strict fabricator for off-road stuff, but I've been off-roading since I was a kid. Growing up here in Colorado, if anybody knows this area, the St. Mary's Glacier hiking trail, that's what started me. That used to be an off-road rock crawling trail. Back in like the late 80s, early 90s, that's what got me started. Was I watched CJ7s on like 35s crawling up all the way up to the top of the mountain. Probably when I was like 3, and that's kind of what got me started on all this, and that never ended. I'm 38 now, and it's been pretty much my entire life of suspension, Jeeps, trucks, Toyotas, you name it. Anything with rocks and mud and dirt, you know.
So, what initially got you interested in modifying and dealing with suspensions?
Just living out here in Colorado, the foothills, even before I had a truck, before I could drive, was mountain biking, and that got me understanding, because when I was a kid, we didn't have suspension mountain bikes. They kind of came out when I was probably 13. Mm-hmm. So diving, that started it. And then I bought my first truck, which is a 76 Scout 2, when I was 13. And of course I wanted to put bigger tires on it. That was it. But also, ground clearance, and watching trucks as a kid climb over rocks, you want ground clearance. And how do you do that? Well, most of it's suspension and tires.
Okay. John, before you ask your next question, I want to ask a little side question here.
Okay,
because
go for it.
You started with the Scout, what do you think of the new electric Scout?
I'm a diehard Scout fan, and I know they're how do I say it? Rust buckets. So Scouts get a lot of rap. I love the old Scouts. The new one is, it's interesting.
Yeah.
I wish they would do a diesel engine, personally, but that's just me. I'm not a huge electric truck fan, so.
Well, actually, I had watched some videos about it, and they're hybrids, not fully electric.
Right, but the engine doesn't drive the drive.
It's more of like it's
a backup generator.
It's an extender, essentially.
It's a generator.
Yeah.
Before we continue on, still, what have you ever thought about doing like an engine swap for it? Like getting a Scout and doing an engine swap for a diesel?
I'd be, if I had to be the first one to do it, I would totally do that. I think that'd be fun. Or I'd just make my own new Scout version of it. But yeah, totally.
All right, yeah. So I'm still kind of new into this. So can you go ahead and explain to me and all the listeners like the difference between a solid axle and the independent front suspension, IFS?
Yeah, so basically there's, a couple types of suspension, at least for off-road. Each one's got its perks and its pros and cons, but in the rock crawling and the off-road and the overland community, most vehicles are solid axle and or IFS. IFS is independent front suspension, which means a solid axle is a solid beam between the two wheels, and that will flex on a pivot point in the middle of the vehicle. Whereas IFS is each wheel has its own suspension travel. Mm-hmm. So if you're going up a rock with a solid axle, the front axle is gonna tilt while the body kind of stays where it is. But in rock crawling and bigger situations, at least old school situations. You know, I'm a dinosaur. Old school's old school, but for rock crawling and like heavy duty stuff, you know, some of the guys that overland full size trucks, those all have solid axles. They're just better in my opinion. IFS is getting better over the years, as you guys see. If you guys look up King of the Hammers races, there's lots of guys like Shannon Campbell that'll do solid axle versus IFS, excuse me, on their rigs. So independent front suspension is each wheel travels on its own. The solid axle is basically a pivot point of one solid axle between the tires, and that's how that helps you climb up rocks, go over obstacles, that kind of stuff. To be generic, there's so much in that.
Yeah, I believe that my Maverick has that IFS.
Yeah. So your Maverick is fully independent suspension. There's not a rear axle that's solid. Mm-hmm. Most of the four-wheel drive vehicles, you know, have a rear solid axle and an independent front suspension. Your Maverick is a good example. That is a full independent suspension, so each wheel operates and bounces, if you will, over obstacles on its own.
Yeah, so it has like a better smooth ride, I should say. So there's a side question with this. When would you recommend choosing one over the other?
This is the day-old question. Everybody always asks, you know, what's better, IFS or solid axle?
Yeah. It's
really what you use it for. The reason like your Maverick is fully independent is for ride quality. They're a little more stable on the road. They're more comfortable. Solid axles like old Jeep YJs, the 90s and 80s Jeep Wranglers, those are leaf sprung, which we'll get back into later. Those ride, in some people's taste, like a dump truck. You know, they literally bounce around everywhere. They're somewhat unstable compared to like your Maverick, which is each wheel is calmly bouncing on the road. Mm-hmm. And then solid axles, they have their pros for off-road, but they are, how do I say that, a pain in the neck. They have their issues with ball joints, and you know, you got to replace everything. The tie rods wear out, blah, blah, blah. We'll get into some of that deeper later, but yeah, it just depends on what you're using it for, you know, what you like in a ride quality of the vehicle, what kind of obstacles, like depending on what part of the country you are in, or, you know, countries you're in. Mm-hmm. You know, sand, mud, rocks, water crossing, snow, it all depends.
So I'm going to say something about like the death wobble. That's mostly just like because you have the solid front axle mostly.
Yes. So solid axles, I mean, you could still get some death wobble with IFS, but mostly that's primarily your solid axles, yeah.
Because I know that they happen on Ford, like the F-150 series sometimes. Are those independent front suspension, or is that solid front axle? I can't remember.
The F-150s, which is the smaller of the full size, that's going to be independent front suspension. And then you go up to a 250. Those are the ones that have solid axles up and up. Maybe at least the four-wheel drives. And those are the ones that have the recalls on the control arm bushings and yada, yada, yada. That's what causes death wobble.
Okay.
Loose parts.
Okay.
But mostly that's because they track straight. IFS more, I guess you could say more accurate in terms of how tight the suspension is and steering and stuff driving down the road.
Okay, cool. All right, so for the next question, what is your opinion on long travel suspension setups, and like what scenarios do you think they are most effective?
Okay, so this is the outlier. Most people don't care for or understand long travel. Long travel is like Baja trucks, okay? So Baja trucks, most of those are going to be like your Toyotas, your F-100, F-150s, those kind of trucks, you know, Chevys. Those race the Baja race. Long travel means the control arms are longer than stock. I'm probably saying this wrong, but I say this generically so everybody can understand it. There's a lot of deeper terms than that, but long travel is where you have long travel. And the travel means the movement of your wheel up and down when you're going over obstacles at high speeds mostly. Long travel is usually IFS. They are the exceptions of your Bronco 2s, your older F100s, F150s, Broncos. Those are a twin I-beam axle, if you guys know what those are. It's a solid axle that pivots in the middle like an IFS. So it's kind of the hybrid between them. People use those in a lot of jumping scenarios. Like long travel is made to be exercised, as we call it, on the trail. So you can jump it as long as your shocks are longer. But it's just the long travel is more of like, it's expensive. It's not very good for the road. They can be, but they can handle a lot more, and it allows your wheels to travel up and down further.
So you wouldn't find that in a factory car.
No, this is all aftermarket. This is custom stuff. This is super, super duper, beating it up hard. Like, this is off-road extreme. The Ford Raptor, some people, argue the Ford Raptor is the only vehicle that comes with long travel. It's kind of long travel. It's not really. But yeah, that's something you modify. You take out your suspension, you put in long travel.
Okay.
But that's like the extreme on one side. That's like your Baja trucks again, where you're jumping it and,
I wouldn't mind getting something like that.
Oh, yeah. So
Probably not for everyday travel. But.
Side story, yeah. I drive my main truck right now that I drive and I'm obsessed with. I'm a 100 series Land Cruiser guy. There's a guy out there right now that is designing a long travel system for the Land Cruisers, because our Land Cruisers have independent front suspension with torsion bars. And that's a whole other story we'll get into as well. But that is killer, because no one's done it yet. And we've all kind of wanted to do that, including me, especially being a fabricator, is dialing in, figuring out what shocks would work to get rid of the torsion bars so we have more travel. Because of the weakness of IFS on those is the front. I guess I should back up. The independent front suspension doesn't have as much travel as a solid front axle.
Okay.
So that's why a lot of guys will take their IFS out and put in long travel IFS, so that you have more travel, more flex, more jump, that kind of stuff.
I know that Chevy makes a kit for that for the Colorado as well.
Yeah. Chevy's real popular in Baja trucks. That's just off the top of my head, like Chevys and Fords will be the ones, and Toyota Tacomas and stuff like that, where there's so many options in long travel. They're a lot more expensive than regular lift kits or anything else, and that's where you're modifying everything.
Yeah,
to
I know.
make it work.
I know the kit was like, I think it was like $5,000 just for all of that. So yeah, it's not cheap
whatsoever.
whatsoever.
They're $5,000 to $40,000 plus, if you depends on how crazy you are. But
and
competition trucks have long travels, more or less. What I'm trying to say.
Yeah,
they're not necessarily street legal in some cases.
I wouldn't know.
They're fun though.
Yeah, I actually had another quick question. I don't think we'll get to it here in a little bit, so let's go ahead and cover it real quick. You were talking about leaf spring suspensions and another type of suspensions. Do you want to quickly cover those as well?
Yeah, so just to be generic and somewhat quick, so we don't dive too deep in, because I could go for hours, but your older vehicles, like the wagons, and hence why the technology has been around for hundreds of years, leaf springs. So leaf springs are where you have a solid axle with two leaf springs, which is a stack of spring steel leaves that support the weight of the vehicle. You'll notice a lot of your pickup trucks, whether they have a solid front axle or not, the rear will be a solid axle with leaf springs. Leaf springs don't flex. The old wives' tale that leaf springs don't flex as much as control arms and coils. I can prove that wrong, but the leaf springs are the oldest technology of suspension. That's what we had on our horse and buggies.
I feel like it's the most one of the simpler ones.
It's the simplest, most reliable way of suspending the weight of your vehicle over obstacles, if you will, the road.
Yeah.
A lot of the older vehicles, even I can't think of the last, I'd say late 90s is probably the last time you'll see a vehicle like a Ford 7.3 diesel, like the 99, 98s. Those will have leaf springs in the front.
So they're not really made for comfort. They're more made for like load bearing.
They're more heavy duty. They're more for pickup trucks. You'll have them in small SUVs all the way up to like I said, late 90s, I think, was the last of the leaf springs, at least in the front.
Yeah.
Trucks like Dodge and stuff, they're going to coil and control arms, which if you control arms are what hold the axle in place. on a solid axle, and they'll put either coils, shocks, or the combination of both. Each one does its own purpose. So if you look at the new Dodges, they have a setup in the rear axle with either airbags, coils, or shocks that support the axle with control arms. The traditional way for the last 200 years has been leaf springs because they ride okay, they flex okay. There's a lot of modifications, i.e. like a Jeep YJ. I'll go back to that one a lot because that's a simple one. The early 90s Jeeps, they had leaf springs front and rear with solid axles front and rear, hence why they ride like a dump truck. Mm-hmm. So a lot of guys, you can do a shackle lift, which is, 2 inch here and there to lift the shackles in the front of the leaf springs. There's a million different ways to slice improvements on leaf springs. Even though they're 100 years old, you can easily modify that. And personally, because I'm old school, the next rock crawler I'm going to build is probably a square body Chevy or like a Dodge truck, and I'm going to run leaf springs because A, they're cheap, B, they're almost bulletproof, and C, with technology this day and age, you can modify leaf springs and make them do just as anything else you want. Did that answer your question? I'm trying to think.
Yeah. I was just trying to get like a basic overview because I watch a show called Forged in Fire, and that's like when they go to get the steel, they come in with a junk car, and they're like, yep, you can take anything off this vehicle, and that's what everybody always goes for. I've seen it on vehicles. It looks cool. I looked at a old vehicle. I can't remember what it was, but it had I think it was an old Ford Bronco. It had a nice red interior and exterior and a fuzzy interior for some reason. I don't know why the guy decided to do that.
Sounds right.
Yeah.
Yeah, leaf springs are old school. I mean, it's just a bunch of spring steel stacked on top of itself, and that's what holds the weight. Fun fact about leaf springs, you can take leaf springs like junk ones, like let's say you're putting new ones on once they wear out after 20 years. That steel is spring steel, and so we take those leaf springs apart and make knives out of it. Mm-hmm. You can individually take out a leaf and forge it basically into a knife, and you carve it and yada yada. But fun fact, I use leaf springs for a lot of things.
All right, so now time for the official question. Why do people typically choose leveling kits, vice like lifting, and what are the most common misconceptions about them?
Good question. This is something I definitely wanted to, this is my piece of advice to people is, yes, lift kits cost money. You want to lift your truck to put bigger tires on it, go off-roading, yada yada. A leveling kit, in some instances, which is the cheaper version, is a puck. It's a round piece that goes on top of the stock suspension, coilover, and or shocks, and that levels the front of a truck. A lot of trucks, well, 90% of them, they are not level when you buy them because the rear is higher than the front, especially on pickup trucks, because it's supposed to be able to sag with load in it. Mm-hmm. So everybody... Nowadays, we don't use our pickup trucks like we used to. So pickup trucks, everyone wants to level it to make it look better. And it's mostly for looks, in my opinion. Out of the 15 years of working on trucks and shops, everybody wants a leveling kit. And I try to tell everybody, what kind of leveling kit? And here's the day-old question. The common misconceptions is everyone wants to just lift it. And they buy a $39, $50 leveling kit, and they slap it in there. That's all fine and dandy, but at that point, you're stretching the stock geometry of the vehicle's engineered parameters. And so when you put a leveling kit, let me back up. So in a leveling kit, you can get a new coilover or shock that is the correct height, and then get your alignment, and you're good to go. And that is affecting only the suspension, and it does what it needs to. Everyone's misconception is, oh, it's cheap, it's cool, I can throw it on there. Yes, you can. But when you take a shortcut to level your truck, do your research, get the right suspension modifications. Don't just put a leveling puck in your suspension, because that trickles down into your CV axles, your tie rods, your alignment, your upper control arms. I try to steer people away from leveling kits unless they're going to replace their coilovers and get in alignment. In some instances, depending on which vehicle it is, like a Toyota Tacoma, you can get away with 1/2 inch, 1 inch level on a suspension kit. But I always try to tell people, get an upgraded upper control arm when you do a leveling kit, because when you change a 1/2 inch to raise the front of your truck, you're changing 15 different angles at a drastic degree all the way down to your wheels. And so your tires will wear out, your shocks will wear out prematurely, your tie rods will wear out, your steering is going to be a little off, all that kind of stuff. So my advice to people is, if you're going to do a leveling kit, it's cheaper than a full lift kit. And if you want just a tiny bit of lift in the front to level your truck, that's fine. Fox, Bilstein are the two major, everyone knows what those names are. If you get a leveling kit from Fox or Bilstein, they offer, for example, Bilstein makes 5100s for Toyota Tacoma. Mm-hmm. That is replacing the inside of your coilover on the front of your truck on your IFS suspension. Instead of putting a puck to lengthen your coilover to lift your truck, you can replace the guts of your suspension to have more up and down travel, the correct amount of down travel, up travel of your wheels. Like when you're going over bumps, that is up travel and down travel. That's the force of the weight of your vehicle down on the suspension. Like I said, leveling kits are cool. I would spend the extra money. That's always my advice to people. If you're going to do it, save your money, buy the right stuff, do it right the first time. But yeah, leveling kits are cool, but they can be a pain in the neck later on.
Yeah, so my biggest thing that I have for the Maverick are, I pretty much have the one company, Rough Country, that makes a 1 inch or a 2 inch lift kit, which is pretty much just replacing the coilovers and the shocks and putting brand new ones on. Or I can get the leveling kit, which will raise the front 2 inches and the back 1 inch, and that's like the 2 inch leveling kit because of how far down the Maverick sits.
Right.
So.
Yeah. That's a good topic. I did a lot of Rough Country lifts, not to bash them at all. They're a great company. But they are the cheaper version, and sometimes they're the only option. And in some instances, especially the Ford Bronco Sports, the Mavericks, they tend to break a lot of a lot of parts when doing a leveling kit on that. And that's the hard part about the Maverick and the Bronco Sports, just for reference. I did, when the Bronco Sports first came out, I did probably 15 to 30 of them. And I would say half of them came back from the Rough Country lifts because they broke the top of the coilover, came through the hood almost. It broke them. So be wary on that one. Do your research. It's a hard subject on that one, but just be careful. That's why my advice to people is, when you have a newer vehicle, wait a little bit till you lift it, because let Rough Country and those first people that jump on it, let them design their lift kit and get it out there and see what happens. Then Fox will come in and, do their full-on research and development, and they'll figure out a better way to do it. Usually the cheap guys will be the ones that come out first, and that's great. But usually the cheapest means there's more issues.
Yeah, so when I was looking into putting the lift kit on, I went to the Overland store, which is kind of like 20 minutes away from me, and they told me to go to their shop and whatnot, and they said basically what you're saying is that you can do it yourself, but there's been a lot of issues with the Rough Country lift kits of everybody having it come out of their front suspension block areas. I can't quite think of like through the
suspension strut mounts, right?
It's the upper. Yeah, that's technically called a strut, but yeah, the coilover, the strut. My terminology is a little off, but yes, the 3 bolts that hold the struts in the front of the vehicle and sometimes the rear, depending on what suspension. I haven't looked at a Maverick yet, but the Bronco Sports have trailing arms in the rear with coilover system, that kind of stuff. But yeah, the Bronco Sports, man, they when you modify them, those 3 bolts that hold those struts in kind of went through the brace or the the coil bucket area underneath the hood, and it broke through that. And I was actually on the phone with Rough Country for months, talking to them about, and that's the fun part about my background is I went to school for car design, mechanical engineering, and industrial design. So fortunate for them, I kind of figured out a solution when we did those 30 Broncos, and I kind of like modified their lift kit, called them and showed them and measured it and was like, you need to fix this. Here's how to fix it. And I think they ended up doing that because of me, actually. Which is kind of weird. I'm just Joe Schmo putting lift kits on, but I have a lot of weird information and skills, and that was a whole fun story that it's kind of funny you bring that up because that was that's a word of advice for people out there with Bronco sports is, if you have a clunking noise after you put a lift kit on, do your research, please.
Even the big companies need some outside help sometimes.
Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, they're out there just trying to get a product out, trying to, get that money.
And it's about the money, but it's also usually the cool part about Rough Country is they're the pioneers of some of the stuff that the other companies wait till they do it, and then they fix what they messed up on. So God bless Rough Country, because I do love their products, and I've done a lot of Rough Country lift kits. They're a little cheaper, and they work great to a certain point. Like if you just want a lifted truck to put tires on, that's great lift kit.
So they're a great entry level.
Excellent, yeah, excellent entry level.
Okay,
yep,
that's fair. So I think you kind of already covered this, but could you explain a little more into the alignment issues that could come up after installing a leveling kit, and how could you prevent or it be fixed?
That's a great question. It's not just leveling kits. This would be any time you modify your vehicle with a suspension lift. Mm-hmm. The biggest one is people think because a leveling kit's cheaper, they don't have to do other things to it. Most people understand when you put a full-on lift kit on, you're going to have more issues, more parts, more money, that kind of stuff. But you get what you pay for.
Yeah.
Leveling kit, a lot of the biggest misconception is that, I can put a leveling kit on, it's only 1/2 inch, 1 inch, it's not going to mess with my steering. No. I took years of alignment classes and studied suspension like crazy. Every little minuscule bit can mess things up. Usually on most vehicles, if you do a leveling kit, we're talking 3/4 of an inch added to your front coilover suspension. You still need an alignment. Do you need one immediately? Yeah, some cases. It depends on the vehicle. Tacomas, you can get away with 1/2 inch leveling kit, 1 inch, and it's off a little bit. But the bigger the leveling kit is, especially like a Chevy, some of the Chevy 1500s and the Dodge 1500 Rams, if you're putting a leveling kit on it, it is wise to get upper control arms. And upper control arms can change your camber, your caster, and your steering. And it'll be able to be adjusted. When you do a leveling kit or a lift kit, it's always wise to get upper control arms. And the reason that is one of 4 adjustments on your suspension that can put your vehicle back to the stock geometry of the steering and the suspension of how it's supposed to function. So you don't need tires, you don't ruin parts that cost more money eventually, and your overall performance of your vehicle.
So I have a question. So Chevy themselves just sells the a front leveling kit. It's I think an inch, but it's a puck, like you said, it's a piece of metal.
Yeah.
Do you think that Chevy took that into it, the factory suspension geometry into account when selling this separately, just the puck? Or do you think they designed the ZR2 with some room for adjustment for that kind of thing?
That's a great one. Yes, all the above. So a lot of vehicles people don't realize, like Ford Raptor or the Bison Colorado that you drive, and the Tacoma TRD Pros, they all come an inch higher than the Sport or the factory one. A lot of these companies team up with Ford, like Ford SVT, special vehicle teams, TRD Pro, the Bison. They have a little bit of wiggle room. They're all designed the same way. But when you go and get a factory backed up lift kit part, Jeep does the Mopar 3-inch lift for the Wranglers. Those are factory engineered like the lift kit company gets with Ford or Jeep, and they design it on factory spec.
Okay.
The Chevy Z71 pickup trucks, the 1500s, they have a Trail Boss. The Trail Boss sits, I think it's 1.25 inches taller than the regular 1500 four-wheel drive truck.
Okay.
Their coilovers are 1 inch or 2 taller, but their adjustments on the suspension, the alignment, are adjustable or adjusted to that lift kit. Now, when you go aftermarket, you sometimes run the risk of you're probably getting a better engineered angle, if you will. But yeah, that's a good question. That is a thing. Yeah, those parts that you buy through Chevy for your truck, your Chevy truck, if you were to do a leveling kit, those usually are designed with the lift kit company and Chevrolet to be factory spec. So that in those situations, it is okay with that.
Okay.
Then you wouldn't. I always recommend an alignment because tires are expensive, and if you do a leveling kit and you mess up, one angle off of your control arm, your tires are going to wear, and those tires are $500 a piece sometimes.
Yeah. Okay. I guess we'll move on to actual lift kits now. So, John, I know you had a question about this one, so I'll let you take over on that.
Yeah, so there's many reasons, but what is like the main reason people choose lift kits, just beyond the aesthetics?
Out of all the years I've been working on trucks and dealing with full drive and lift kits, I would say it's mostly so people can put bigger tires on it. That'd be the number one reason people come in and want a lift kit. Second would be performance. It goes along with the aesthetics of putting bigger tires on, as people want to drive over big stuff. You want to get a lift kit. You want to not scratch your rocker panels or your doors. But yeah, it's basically, performance.
From your experience, what is the most overlooked aspect when someone decides to install a lift kit?
These are all great questions. First thing, I'll go back on this a lot, is alignments. If you, I say this from experience. I had the first truck I put a lift kit on was my Scout, which was easy. Second vehicle was a Jeep Cherokee XJ. And this is the problem I ran into, was the first thing was, I didn't realize when you buy a lift kit, sometimes they don't come with extended brake lines or brake line drops. So I would say the most important thing is just do your research, talk to people, go on your forums, look at what a full lift kit comes with. And my advice is go online, look up the most expensive lift kit when you decide to put a lift kit on your truck. See what parts come with it. And then you can pick the lift kit depending on your price or your preference or your brand preference. But a lot of it is, don't forget the small things. Don't forget, some cases you need a longer drive shaft. Some cases you need sway bar disconnects. A lot of these cheaper lift kits won't come with every single part. And I don't know, there's a lot of times the lift kits won't really come with anything you need. They come with just the suspension components, not the brake line extensions, not the sway bar extensions, the drag link drop brackets, all these parts I could rattle off. From my experience, that was something I did, is I installed a 4-inch lift on my first Jeep Cherokee XJ, and I needed brake lines. And I was halfway through the lift kit build, didn't have a brake line, and they ripped the brake line out of my truck. And I had to go to the store, and we had to figure out stainless steel extended brake lines. All I got to say is, from my experience, is do your research, ask somebody if you don't know how to do it, and if you don't feel comfortable putting a lift kit on, save your money and pay somebody to do it, because it is your safety. And that's the biggest thing I always tell people, it's your safety. Like, you're going to put a lift kit on, yeah, it could be more dangerous, but it's not really. A lot of people like to argue that, but if you do it correctly, you can be okay.
And I have a separate question. What are some, the bad side of getting a lift kit? Like, what if you had to, recommend someone not get a lift kit? What would be kind of the reasons why?
The older I get, and all the years of doing this, I would say don't forget about, once you put a lift kit on, you're going to have issues later on. And that's if you use it a lot too, the vehicle. I'm one of those people that beat the living you-know-what out of my vehicle, and I wheel it very hard. I rock crawl it hard. I'd say the advice is, after you do a lift kit, expect a little bit more maintenance and more issues to evolve on your vehicle. Even if you don't four-wheel it, even if you don't go through the mud, it's going to have more issues because you're adding, your center of gravity is a little higher, and that tends to put more stress on other things. It's kind of like your body. If you're lifting something with your right arm, the left side of your body is going to counteract your right side muscles. It's the same aspect on a vehicle. If you're lifting your vehicle, you're going to stretch its legs a little bit more than it should sometimes. So the after effects are the maintenance, the tires, all that comes with it.
Yeah, so I've got the next question here, and do you have any recommendations for like selecting the correct height of a lift base on a vehicle or intended use?
Yeah, that's a hard one because it depends on the vehicle, depends on the use. There's a lot of variables, and this is why, like, if you're going to pay somebody to do it, even if you're not and you want to just get advice or see how much a lift kit costs, it is good to go to your local four-wheel drive shop and talk to them and like see what options are there, and talk to, even if you're doing it yourself and you're buying it at Four Wheel Parts and you're buying a lift kit, I always tell people, like, do your research, spend the time to kind of see what people have, Google it, look at it. In your case with the Maverick, I guess it's hard to select that because that's a very unique vehicle in a sense. So if you want to put bigger tires on it, you want to go with the higher one.
Yeah.
I like to keep it in the middle unless it's my full-on trail rig. If it's my trail rig truck, I don't care. I go big and go home, or I do like small lift, huge tires, steeper gears, that kind of stuff. In a daily driver, I like to just lift it a little bit, put a little bit bigger tire on it. That keeps it more to the factory comfort and the performance of itself of the vehicle.
Yeah.
So I guess the middle would offer more comfort than anything else.
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't go all the way out big, Go medium in the road in terms of height.
Everyday driver, go medium. True trail rig, go.
The reason we say go big or go home is the bigger you go, the more problems. So go all out.
Yeah, more money you spend on it. I guess that's all for lift kits by itself. So we're gonna do. I don't know if what.
Oh, I was gonna say I could add a few touches on that.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh yeah, go for it.
So being on the subject of lift kits, I do like. I love talking about lift kits. Basically, like in a nutshell, to summarize this part of the lift kits, leveling kits, lift kits, blah, 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 blah. If you're going to modify your vehicle, you're doing it for a purpose, whether it's to get bigger tires, to get through the mud, that kind of stuff. I always tell people now, I wish I knew what I know now when I was 16 putting a lift kit on my Jeep or my Scout. And that is research it, save your money, and if you don't know how to do it, ask somebody or have somebody help you or pay somebody to do it. Because you can break stuff very, very easily and very not easily. But just being an advisor, a service advisor, and the lift kit installer, and the engineer, and the guy using it, I have four sides of this aspect. And my best piece of advice is do your research. And then ask yourself, what are you using your vehicle for? Do you need the 6-inch lift kit or do you need the 4-inch lift kit? If you do the 6-inch lift kit, are you driving this every day to work, 100 miles to work or 5 miles? Some of us don't care, but these are the questions you got to ask yourself when you want a lift kit. My main reason for lift kits is bigger tires. Always. I always want to put bigger tires on it with not a huge lift kit. And the reason I say that is the center of gravity when you're four-wheeling. The center of gravity is the middle point of weight versus volume, kind of. Mm-hmm. My terms are off, but if you can picture the center console of your truck, that is like the center of your vehicle, and that's where the weight, you want the center of gravity lower to the ground, no matter how tall your truck is. So you have more weight. Like if you put rock sliders on your Tacoma, that adds more weight to the lower side of your vehicle, which lowers your center of gravity, so you don't roll as much. So that's just one example. Like skid plates, winch bumper, yeah, they suck. You put more weight on it, your gas mileage goes down. You put bigger tires on, stuff like that. And that brings me to another subject. When you guys lift your vehicles and you want to step up to bigger tires, the rule of thumb most of the time is 35-inch tires or bigger. You have to re-gear it. You don't have to, but you're not going to be satisfied with it. So, when I lifted my Scout when I was a kid, I put 38s on it. I didn't even know what gearing was. And then, I had my old guy that I knew was like, hey, did you gear it? And you're going, what? Gear what? He's like, the axles. Did you re-gear your axles? That's another thing that when you put a lift kit on and you want to buy bigger tires, if you're doing 33s, 34s, 35s, you can get away with some lighter gears, like 410s, 358s, 356s. They're going to do okay. But when you lift a vehicle, especially like Jeep Wranglers, they come with 356s from the stock, and you put 38s on it, your Jeep's going to drive like dog doo-doo. So that's when you start rolling in the dough, and you got to, a re-gear is $2,300.
Lord.
And then your tires are $2,300, and the lift kit's $2,300. So you're basically, that's $10,000 to have a functioning lifted vehicle with new tires and gears to drive correctly. These are all the things that I didn't know when I started building these trucks when I was 13 to 16. I didn't know this. By the time I was 18, I'd done 8 Jeeps I've owned. And I've owned, side fun fact, I've owned 156 vehicles, most of which were 4-wheel drive vehicles. That's how crazy I am. But over the years, I got to remember, this day and age, it's $5,000 to $20,000 minimum to get a vehicle where you think you want it. Your neighbor just came home with a brand new JL on 38s and winched out. Your neighbor may have bought that at the dealership, and that's $120,000 for the whole thing, or you could have bought it and built it. The thing is, you could buy a Jeep for $80,000, spend $10,000 in lift kit and stuff, and then you still got $4,000 for tires, $4,000 for wheels, $4,000 for the winch, all these upgrades. Just do, if you're going to do that, do your research and understand that if you're going to lift a vehicle, know what your purpose is for it. If you're going to lift it to go hunting and you have a hunting rig and you have an old CJ7, a $500 leaf spring lift kit and a torsion bar or tie rod end, I can't talk. A new drag link and a $500 lift kit and some cheap 33s, you're good to go. You got a brand new Tacoma and you want to lift it and put 35s on it, you're looking at $20,000 to do it right. But that's just my piece of advice.
Okay, that's fair.
All right, so let's go ahead and wrap up this portion for now. We're going to have a second part with him. We have a lot more to talk about, so I think this is going to wrap it up for part 1 today.
Sounds good to me. If you're interested in part 2, we're going to be talking about, we got maintenance, we got body lifts, we got bonus suspension topics, and general advice. So if you're ready for all that, tune into the next episode, and we'll see you there.
Peace.
Out.
Saturday morning, I wake up and see the sunrise. Pack the truck with recovery gear and supplies. Put my route in my GPS and play some tunes. And sing it's time to go